I'm Dr. Samanthika Gallage. I work as an assistant professor in marketing at University of Nottingham. In this presentation, I will be discussing about one of the key trends, consumer behavior trends that we will see in the post-pandemic world. So my topic is, should we shop till we drop in the post-pandemic world? So during this presentation and also after the presentation, I would want you to reflect yourself as consumers. And also I would want you to reflect on your experience in terms of consumer preferences. And you will agree with most of the things that I have to say. Of course, you will disagree as well. There's always, these kind of topics are always very debatable, and people have different viewpoints and arguments. But it's important that I bring certain facts and give you some sort of understanding about one of the biggest trends that we see in today's world, and also we will see much more in the post-pandemic world. So over the past few years, one of the key event, or one of the key things that impacted all our lives across the whole world, across all countries, is the COVID-19 pandemic. You would agree with me. So it impacted us, of course, health-wise, but also it impacted all the economies. It impacted us socially. It impacted us in every possible way. And it changed our social lives and most of the things that we do in our daily lives. The destructive nature of relationship between us and the nature, there's quite a lot of things that are related to consumption. Pollution is related to consumption. Then overfishing is related to consumption, and also the solutions that they talk about is very much related to consumption. Like, be conscious about what we are consuming, be conscious about what we are wasting, be conscious about where they are coming from. So if you look at over the past, over the 20th century, because of the capitalism industrial revolution, we saw that an ordinary person was turned into a consumer, and this consumer has an unquenchable thirst to consume more and more, because that was the narrative in the consumer world, that you need to consume more to be happy, to bring joy, to achieve things. So success was measured based on the consumption, how big your house is, what type of a car you use, how many cars you have in your house. So in 1955, the retail analyst Victor Lebov said that we need things to be consumed, burned up, replaced, and discarded at an ever accelerating rate, because that's what brings profits to organization. That's what was bringing a growing economies. But few years later, now today, when we look back, all these things have created this environmental chaos. So societies are being encouraged to consume more because they are being indulged in this magical thinking. All this consumption, all these material goods will deliver that non-material well-being, will give us the happiness, and will give us that peace in life. So that lead to destructive overconsumption, which lead to that destructive relationship with the nature, which leads to this kind of pandemics. So some scholars are even arguing that major cause of damage to the natural environment is high level of consumption, and consumption is the reason why anything get produced. So in order to consume, market companies need to produce. When they produce things, they extract more and more natural resources, and also after the consumption, we waste things into the we release waste into the environment. So then these things damage the environment. So then there's various things that are happening in our social world for consumers, that repeatedly telling them that you need to consume more. This is the happiness, consume more. This is where your happiness is from. Especially if you look at certain social media influencers who are talking about various lifestyles. Increasing consumption, having more clothes, eating more kind of different types of foods. So these kind of things are really impacting consumers to consume more. So but at the same time, if we really look at the facts, it's quite shocking, because at the moment we are using 1.7 Earths, which means we are using one more Earth's capacity than what is available. We are using future generations' resources. So, but of course, this is disproportionate. If you look at the countries around the world, average consumer is using 5 more earths. Average US consumer is using 5 more earths. Average UK consumer is using 3 more earths. But when you look at certain developing countries like India, average Indian consumer is using zero point 0.7 earths. So this is disproportionate. So in this case, there's a high responsibility lies on various developed countries than in developing countries. But also, it's not to mention that there are a lot of problematic practices in developing countries as well in terms of waste management and consumption. So this whole consumer society is built up on two problematic assumptions. So we consumers think that we can continue. I always refer to as we because we are also consumers. So consumers assume that we can keep continuing to consume at this rate, and there's that because we have unlimited resources, which is a very problematic assumption. And also we assume that we can keep on generating waste, and we can dispose them indefinitely to the environment, which is not true. So the moral question behind that many consumers are asking now is, should some of us go on living at the expense of others, and how longer can we do it, that the future generation will look back at us and think that why did they do this, what were they thinking? So that's why one of the biggest trends that we will see in the post-pandemic world is the sustainable consumption, which we already see. But now people are more aware about this kind of things. So there will be more and more people wanting to, consumers wanting to consume sustainably. So what is this sustainable consumption? So sustainable consumption is using products and services, bringing a better quality of life, of course, responding to basic needs and wants, but we need to think about minimizing the usage of natural resources, and also we need to think about waste and pollution, how responsibly we are disposing our waste. And more importantly, we should not jeopardize the needs of the future generation, because we as consumers, we have a responsibility, and organizations have a responsibility as well, not to jeopardize the needs of the future generation. So that's why now so many organizations are talking about sustainable development goals, UN sustainable development goals, that are really talking about climate change, no poverty, having quality education. All these things are interrelated. And in these sustainable development goals, there's a key thing that talks about responsible consumption and production. So when we think about sustainable consumption of consumers, it does not necessarily mean that consumers have to do deep sacrifices, but it means that they can fulfill their needs, have a better quality of life, but organizations and consumers, they both will be more creative in their consumption, which is they find, consumers are trying to find alternative forms of consumption. I will give some examples. And also organizations are trying to redesign their manufacturing processes so that they can minimize the extraction of natural resources from the environment and also minimize the waste. So reusing and recycling is one of the biggest concepts that we see around the world now. So if you look at countries like Sri Lanka, generations before, we had these practices. Our grandparents were never, they were always reusing and recycling things. Now in the Western societies those days, there were quite a lot of waste. But now the Western societies are also moving into reusing and recycling practices. So for instance, for example, Harrods being one of the luxury brands, they are also now starting to launch fashion rental services. So instead of consumers buying clothes, they are looking at options such as renting clothes. So, and also there are a lot of, so digital space can do quite a lot of things in this. So there are a lot of digital influencers that are promoting sustainable travel, sustainable fashion, vegan cosmetics, zero waste, minimalism. So I have given an example of a digital influencer who had a walk-in wardrobe, and she downsized it to a rack, and then she downsized it to zero shopping, and she was not buying any new fashion items. So this, we see these kind of digital influencers quite a lot nowadays in the digital space, who are influencing consumers to consume sustainably. And also like I said before, all these digital aspects can play a big role. So there are various apps that are helping to reduce food waste. So this is another example from the UK context. There's an app called Olio that people can reduce food waste. So for instance, if I am buying, let's say I have 5 bananas and I will be only eating 3 bananas, I can donate 2 bananas. So there are people who are willing to share their excess food, and also then there are some others who want to get this excess food instead of buying them. So you share them, you cannot sell them, of course. You have to share the food, excess food, and someone else can request the food and come and collect them. So I've been using this app, and it's a great way to minimize food waste instead of throwing them into the bin. So, and then we also see that instead of buying things, people tend to rent things. For instance, to rent a bike. Instead of buying a cycle, people want to rent a cycle and use it whenever they need it, by paying a nominal amount, and then they return it back. So in this way, they try to minimize their consumption. And also, like I said before, there are quite a lot of shared consumption spaces that has been created using various apps and web portals. So people can share things with their neighbors instead of buying various tools. People can go to this website and rent a tool. And then also there's another really fascinating, really interesting app called Blah Blah Cars. So instead of for instance, if let's say if I'm traveling from Nottingham to London and I'm driving and I have 3 spare seats, which I don't have anyone to take, so then I can post in Blah Blah Cars saying that I'm going to London. If anyone wants to go to London, you can share the car with me. Of course, you can charge a nominal amount. So in that way, instead of wasting those 3 spaces, you can be more sustainable. You take someone to London, and also in that way there will be not a lot of cars on the road, less pollution, less wastage of resources. So this will be a really good platform. This kind of a platform will be really good in the context of Sri Lanka, for instance. Especially it will also combat the traffic issue that we face in Colombo. So while consumers are moving towards sustainable consumption, then organizations will also move to sustainable production processes, which we already see nowadays. So they are trying to green their marketing mix in terms of production process, in terms of packaging, passing those cost benefits to consumers in terms of pricing, in terms of distribution using very sustainable methods to distribute, and also in terms of promotion using less resources. And also when it comes to promotions, it's very important that organizations are not using green and these sustainable claims just to make money, which is something that is very controversial nowadays. We see in Sri Lanka some companies, some organizations are using green claims, but actually there's nothing green inside those organizations. They are just jumping onto this bandwagon to earn more money. But instead, if you take countries like UK, where there are strong regulatory bodies, there's a strong advertising watchdog who is watching these kind of claims, who is looking if these claims are really reliable, if actually these companies are practicing green practices and sustainable practices, and they try to ban if organizations are claiming these kind of things without actually practicing any green things. They try to ban this kind of adverts. For instance, there was a Ryanair advert that the UK advertising watchdog banned because they were claiming that they are green, but they were not practicing any green practices. So these kind of things are really important, because if companies start greenwashing, which means that they use green claims or sustainable claims just to make money, then consumers will be more skeptic towards these kind of practices. So organizations also should make an actual effort to be sustainable. So consumers will be more aware about these things in the future. And of course, in countries like Sri Lanka, we don't have very strong regulatory bodies. So there's a caveat in that. Whereas probably in the future there will be more stronger regulatory bodies there where consumers can play a big role in influencing organizations to be more to be actually sustainable and green instead of claiming that they are green and trying to earn money or trying to use it as a differentiating point. So this is an example of companies becoming green, where in the UK the national grid is investing a lot of money on renewable energy projects, and even some organizations, Patagonia is really trying to reduce demand and encouraging consumers to be sustainable. Buy some things that are sustainable, but don't just buy the sake of buying it. So discouraging fast fashion. And also, some companies are trying to sell close expiry food for a lesser price and trying to reduce the food waste. So that is one of the trends that we will see in the post-pandemic world. Another trend that we will see in the post-pandemic world is the ethical consumption. When we talk about ethical consumption, ethical consumers are trying to influence organizations to care for the nature, but also beyond that, care for the human environment, addressing various issues such as human rights issues and various other issues. So they try to make conscious effort in buying things from organizations who are thinking about the natural environment but also the human environment. So it is under, it covers wide range of activities like avoiding products made in sweatshops, reusing and recycling. Of course, sustainable marketing, sustainable consumption comes under ethical consumption. So non-animal tested products, preferring organic fair trade products. So there can be two things that are happening within this. So ethical consumer either buy things, it could be a positive choice, prefer products that are produced ethically, or else they try to avoid or boycott certain products from various companies if companies are not following certain ethical standards. So when we look at the ethical consumer market, it has been growing in the world. So for instance, in UK in 1999, the ethical consumer market was just 11.2 billion, whereas now it has gone up to 41.1 billion. So consumers are making informed choices like fair trade or reducing waste. These kind of things are informed choices that they are making, really trying to make a difference in the world. Trying to consciously, deliberately making choices that not to use any products that are doing here animal testing. So sometimes they go to extremes such as protesting and boycotting, especially using digital media like using a Facebook page to boycott certain products and protest against certain products. So these are a couple of examples that I can give, like some consumers were boycotting Nestle for unethical promotion of infant formulas in developing world. So these kind of things are happening in the consumer world, and it will be even more in the future. For instance, then companies are trying to change. There are examples that companies had to change their production processes, had to change their branding. For instance, after the Black Lives Matter, after the backlash that Unilever got after Black Lives Matter, they had to rename the Fair and Lovely skin cream. And also sometimes consumers boycott, consumers protest, and they complain against certain products to the advertising watchdog, which based on ethical concerns. So this is another example where Gucci had to ban one of their adverts when they were featuring unhealthily thin models, creating unrealistic standards. And this is another example of how Coca-Cola was promoting Coca-Cola for really small children, that advertising watchdog had to intervene. So these are a couple of trends that we will see in the post-pandemic world. So there's the final thought is sustainable consumption or ethical consumption and production is a mega trend? It should be, because environmental degradation, freshwater depletion, and all these problematic climate crises, they are all mega trends. So if sustainability or sustainable consumption is not a mega trend, or ethical consumption is not a mega trend, it has to be, because so many millions of human lives and also so many countless other species are hanging the balance if we are not being conscious about the environment and the natural plus the human environment as well. So that's about my presentation. Thank you very much.